When growth stalls, most leaders reach for surface fixes like new campaigns, a sharper sales deck, even new hires. But the real issues are often deeper, such as misaligned systems, broken handoffs, or unreliable data. That's why we built the Growth Readiness Score. In just 5 minutes, you'll get a clear score across 4 critical areas of your revenue operations and see how you stack up against your peers with benchmark data. Tap the link in the show notes to get started. It's quick, insightful, and often reveals issues leaders don't expect.
To increase profit, we'll all agree that you kind of have to either increase revenue or decrease cost. So that's one half of my 2x2. So think in terms of increase revenue or decrease cost. And then I just break it down into new and existing. So the simplest way to leave somebody here is, okay, where am I going to go be more profitable by either increasing revenue on the new side or increasing revenue on the existing, or decreasing cost on the new side or decreasing cost on the existing? Just 2x2, up revenue, down cost, new, existing. And that's kind of how I tell people to think, like pick a quadrant and load some data and ask some questions.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Have you ever felt or thought to yourself that you have all the tools and opportunities, and for some reason you feel like you should be further ahead than what you are? Today, I'm going to dig into this with Andrew James, my guest on the RevOps Champions podcast. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You and I have been working on and testing various ways to use AI to do the work of previously human-only sales, marketing, and business processes. What is the biggest challenge you're working on finding a solution for?
The biggest challenge we're solving is getting the internal business data plumbed into AI so you can make decisions off of the hard numbers that matter to your business. So LLMs and the internet as a whole have an amazing amount of data and information. And we all have access to that for free or $20 a month times however many subscriptions we have. But they don't know with clarity things like the number of leads you got yesterday, which ad they came from. They don't have the internal data about a conversation that happened in your CRM. They don't know which leads have been handed off to customer success, but haven't been followed up with on the cadence they ought to be. They don't know all of that kind of stuff. So I started a long time ago as an early weird internet kid, like the kind of young kids when I had hair that were making money from their parents' basement. Right. Early days, eBay, Google, when it was 5 cents a click, all that kind of stuff. And you kind of started to figure out what worked, what didn't. And you just tried to do more of what worked and less of what didn't. And that's kind of what led us to today, where we started to plumb lots of data into their universe to make better decisions against their data. And so we were always using whatever the newest things were on the internet. The marketers are an interesting mix because they're really willing to go pull things in from the latest and greatest and kind of quickly adapt. They're not as engineering minded, so they have to be perfect, but we've become more and more minded that way. And so I just keep seeing this opportunity for people to pull all the data in and make better decisions from that data and go act on it.
Right. I totally agree. But so let's go back to where we started, right? I actually did a post on this yesterday, or responded to someone else's post on LinkedIn about this yesterday, where they were talking about, how you hear all the time, like in our case, it's HubSpot, right? How, we're only using 30% of what HubSpot can do. And my response was, well, I used to think that way too. It's like, well, you have this tool that can do all these things. Why are you only using 30% of it? And what I shared with this person yesterday was like, I've completely flipped my thinking. Is HubSpot keeps adding functionality like every other software tool, whether it's a CRM or otherwise, does. That's the business that they're in. They want to keep giving their customers access to more tools to do more things, but they're not suggesting that you have to use every single one of them. Or at least I'm suggesting you should not be trying to use all of them. What you should be doing is figuring out like what are the specific business challenges or opportunities you have, and then go back to the tool to see which of those the tool set, the platform, to see which specific tools can you pull in to use. And I believe that we can use 30% of HubSpot and drive incredible value. So, but let's come back to that. So we have access to all these tools and opportunities, and people have this feeling that they should be further ahead. How do you think about that?
Well, it came to me from Spotify CEO. So we thought a lot about how does all of this play together? How does our view of the world as we build and roll out and buy products with AI? I think it's an interesting side note here. For the first time, AI will allow more business users and business owners to actually or force them to build tools internal to their organization. They're basically building products to solve their own problems. And that's the same thing you do when you build a workflow automation inside of a tool like HubSpot, or you link it together with N8N or Zapier or Make or whatever. So I think it's worth saying we're all builders. I got back to this idea of ahead from this one simple question about a product. And I think it's good for the audience. Just if you take nothing away, this is a really good question, which is anytime somebody gets done using your product or service or having an interaction with you, what's the way you want them to feel? So compare how you feel when you get done using something like Spotify with getting done using something like Twitter or getting done using something like a CRM. We'll leave names out of it. And you want to think about that. And as I thought about what's the core objective of anything we're building, it's that I want people with AI, you should finish the session feeling ahead. One way of that, the simplest way everybody thinks about it is time savings. I'm ahead of where I would have been had I done this manually. But if you expand your thinking a little bit, that can translate to ahead of my competition, ahead on the timeline, ahead in my career, ahead in many, many other ways.
Yeah.
So the only way I know to help people leapfrog ahead with or without technology is to elevate their thinking a little bit, ask a better question, set a better goal, and look at the core driver of what's going to get them further ahead. What's the place? What's the leverage point? What's the focal point within their business? Where is the constraint that you can alleviate? How can you leapfrog and get further ahead? So the first way that it gets you ahead is focusing on the right problem and really truly honing in and solving that. Like your HubSpot 30% example, if we can use 1% of HubSpot and it gets me closer to my goals faster, 5 times faster, do I really care if I'm not using the other 99%? No, I don't. So it's first find and identify the right problem. What's the one thing, what's the one metric that if we changed it would materially impact the speed at which we move in our business? And then you go into how do we attack that problem and break it down into the various components and alleviate that constraint and get there faster. Right. So I'm biased. I believe that if you can make enough right decisions in the right order, you can have almost any outcome you want. And that's kind of a fundamental underpinning of what we've done. We kind of try to translate all of what we do into decisions. But if you have all the business data and you have the power of a gajillion super genius computers, plus an intelligent human that has all the things a human has to direct it, look at the beginning, look at the end, and let it do some of the middle, you can actually ingest all the data and you can start to ask that very question, which is, where actually should we focus? Where is this business constraint? If we make it really practical in a RevOps scenario, in a sales, marketing, automation scenario, it might be something like looking at the various stages of a pipeline and figuring out where deals stall. Where are we more days or less days than we should between, just to shrink the cash flow cycle from 41 days down to 30, right? And then what's the material impact of that? Just by using the data to focus on the right problem, you're already ahead. And I know a lot of people are out there saying, let's just think about our thinking. And I'm a big fan of that and figure it out on paper. But every time we go do a deeper fundamental analysis, we almost always uncover something a lot more exciting that could get you ahead further. I can think of so many conversations recently. I had a consult with a therapist this week, like who was asking for scaling their practice. And we looked at all the numbers and I said, why don't you just raise your price? You don't need us. Just raise your prices. I mean, it was that simple. It was solvable with math and 100 other things. He was about to embark on a 12-month journey to do something that had a 50-50 shot of success, plus a lot of cost and risk up front. And when you looked at all the data, you could, with math, intuit that he could do a little bit better. I'll give you another more real one from the data. We had a new customer. They do epoxy coatings. They recoat the garage floors. They're looking at the sales cycle. So 41 days from lead to cash or from job started. But we found almost as much AR, accounts receivable, that wasn't in a cadence being collected as their entire sales pipeline. So it's like we can go figure out how to increase this top line revenue number or the speed of getting new revenue in the door, or we
Right.
could just go collect the rest of the money faster. There's no cadence sitting there. Let's
Right.
make sure we collect the money quicker. So there's
Yeah.
almost always, that's a lot of analogies around it, but there's a lot of ways that we can use the data to first find the leverage point. Let's not talk about tools. Let's not talk about what decision to make. Let's not talk about any of that. Let's find the core bottleneck to the business, the thing that if this number changed would move the business forward the fastest.
Hmm.
And my magic trick for this is what I did in X factor optimization. The key to that is finding it and boiling it down to a number that has a dollar sign next to it. It's almost always cost per X or revenue per Y. And if you can translate your business problem into I need cost per X or revenue per Y to move from here to there, and the whole business would change, it gets rid of not 70%, like 99% of the things you need to think about and worry about.
Right. So you're touching on a lot of different aspects, and you're alluding to a lot of the things that business leaders are currently stuck on. Right. So like one of my mentors shared with me, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, he said to me, Brendon, you do realize that 90% of leadership is making decisions. And that really stuck with me because I'd never thought about it through that lens before. Now, listening to you, it sounds like maybe more than 90% of leadership is making decisions. But I think where a lot of leadership teams currently are getting stuck because of the, on the one hand, the opportunity, and on the other hand, the threat of not jumping onto the opportunity that AI brings all of us. They're getting stuck, to your point, in trying to figure out that making the right tool decisions. Which LLM do we use, or how do we structure the LLM to work for our business and whatever? So they're not starting in the right place. And I think this is essentially what you're talking about, is they need to start from a strategic business perspective. In other words, what are the opportunities that we have? What are the metrics we're going to use to measure them? Let's figure out what the dollar signs are. So is that revenue? Is it profitability? Is it LTV? Is it CAC? Whatever it is, let's start there and then get the leadership team in a room and figure out what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and then selectively you bring in the data. You figure out, well, I mean, some of the stuff that you and I have been working on recently are things that we haven't been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, just because it would take us too long if we were doing it with humans, right? We have very smart people working here at Dynamico, and we don't want them doing things that we didn't see the value, even though the value is there. So, for example, auditing a CRM, that would take us 20 to 50 hours, depending on the complexity of a CRM. So we just weren't doing it. And, our clients or businesses didn't want to be paying $5, $10, $15,000 to do an audit of their CRM, even though they probably had, hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars hidden in their CRM.
Yeah.
They just didn't see the value. And many of them still don't, because we're just starting to see it now. But we all know that it's just, what do they say? The horse is almost out of the barn, or whatever the animal is, particularly a farm animal. And it's just going to be a matter of time before everyone realizes that they can suddenly start finding these incredibly valuable things that you've already identified a long time ago, that will completely change what they do, how they do it, how quickly and inexpensively they do it, and what the impact is to their business in real dollar terms, whether it's revenue, profitability, and of course, all the other things that make it very attractive to work for or with a company. So with that said, let's go back to a mistake that you made that taught you most about measuring real profitability.
I mean, the biggest mistake I've made is being shoemaker with no shoes,
I have
right?
no idea I have no idea about.
So every CRM implementation expert I ever talked to of any CRM, when we ask to look at their CRM, they almost always, without fail, tell me the same thing that most agencies tell me. Any good agency, which is like, our ads and landing pages and sales funnels and processes are not as good as our clients because we spend all of our time fulfilling our clients. And the ones who that's not true for, they're pretty bad at fulfilling for their clients, right? So for me personally, the biggest mistake is when I when I deviate from this measure what matters and align all the decision making around that. And it's worth saying it's not just if you said, "Hey, this is just for leadership to make decisions." I think that's the other huge mistake. The huge mistake is we think about this from a frame of people at top will have all data and therefore be able to make decisions, and then everybody below us is just going to be a peon and get there.
Mhm.
And you look at the biggest companies in the world, and it's literally the exact opposite of how they function.
Yeah.
Google famously uses OKRs, objectives and key results, and they don't even know what 80% of the people are working on directly half of the time, maybe
Mhm.
more of that. They're
Yeah.
choosing some of their own objectives. So when you think about decision making, I think we silo it into this idea of somebody at the top is going to make a decision, and it's a lot more about pushing it down. That's why I say we've got to infrastructure this such that even machines could make effective decisions within the right safeguards and rule set to be able to move your business forward.
Right.
So at a high level, sure, there's a business constraint. But if we go down into marketing or sales or customer success, there's going to be in those departments and below each of those decisions for people's jobs for them to go make. And it's something that they can push against and improve upon and
Right.
allowing them to see their piece of the universe. So I think that's the big mistake. Of course, there's times where there's data some people in the business shouldn't have,
Yeah.
but I'm a pretty big believer that if we can feed the right systems and tools and the right people data that's available should be available to them and relevant to them, that
Mhm.
if they look at the scoreboard, they can optimize against it. Humans are great at this. It's like one of the things we're the best at. It's the wisdom of the crowd versus the intelligence of like the one super individual. The market collectively always beats the one player at the top. There's
Sure.
always more right. And so to me, that would be the biggest mistake is when you deviate from kind of picking the thing to focus on when we've not measured it for ourselves and used it for ourselves. And furthermore, when we've thought about decisions as a top down only thing versus giving every user their capability to see the piece of the business that they affect and having their own individual metrics that they're trying to get moved forward.
Right. Yeah. But I think what I was referring to was more the fact that we're seeing so many leadership teams, and I'm talking about leadership teams that are whether it's a $50 million business or $100 million business or a $500 million business or $1 billion business. They're they're not they're not making the decision to equip their people with the tools and the data to do the things that you just talked about. So they're
Exactly.
they're 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 stuck and they're afraid to make the changes to move into this AI era, and they know that they're going to be left behind, but they still don't know what the first step is. So even though I think pretty much everyone listening is going to resonate with what you're saying, 95%, we know the statistics that we see on LinkedIn and every day and all the other media. 100% of business leaders believe that of companies that are serious about growing, they believe that AI will be an an absolutely necessary part of their future. But only 5% of them are actually doing something about it.
Mm.
And that's what I'm trying to figure out how to help those leadership teams overcome. You've alluded to this a little bit. Is like start simple, like whether it's marketing or sales or customer service or whatever it is. Look at the things that the obstacles that are currently blocking revenue, profitability, efficiency, productivity, whatever it is, and just start building use cases for that. I mean, I think what you've built is already way surpassed that, because with Cerebro Plum, we can put data from pretty much any source that they use, whether it's their CRM or their accounting software, whatever tools and software that they use. We can pull all the data into Cerebro Plum and help them make decisions, which I think is probably why you're going, Brendon. We can do all that. But really, what message I'm trying to get out is like, how do we help more of these 95% of business leadership teams get beyond this point that they're in of being stuck where they are?
Well, I might misquote this. There's a book that's been very, very, very well received and quoted by a lot of people. Morgan Housel, I think, Psychology of Money.
Okay.
And I'm forgetting the sequel he wrote to it, but I think the fundamental answer to your question is conviction. People, I think the way he said it is
Mm.
people want conviction more than they want accuracy.
Which comes
And
back to what you were saying about decision making. Yeah.
well, yeah, because what so sometimes when we were mostly in serving client mode or when I was coaching team members on how to lead up the chain of command, for
Hmm.
example, which is probably a place that a lot of people in your universe find themselves, is they're kind of in the messy middle. They're VP or director of something, and they've got to get buy-in up and down the org chart. The
Mm.
idea is, how can we give people above us decisions, not projects, right? Or a
Mm.
better way to say it is, the trade just hasn't been made clear enough to them. Because
Mm.
what business owner, if you said, hey, if you put $10,000 a month here, here's the forecasted ROI impact of it is 100,000, and they have conviction that that will yield that result, wouldn't make the
Mm.
decision. It's not a decision. It's not a difficult decision to make anymore. I think
Right.
it's a matter of conviction, which is why I go back to the data, because oftentimes it's a trust factor, not whether the data is accurate or not, although that is a component. It's getting to sufficient conviction to go further. The
Mm.
other thing I would say is equally important. There's a volume of low accuracy, low conviction required, obvious small decisions that just aren't getting made, that
Hmm.
people can do much faster and more of with AI. You know,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
simplest one is something like, I'll give you an example. You mentioned doing things that we now will do that wouldn't have done because it would have taken too much human time. I'll give
Hmm.
you a really teeny tiny easy one. Subject line for an email. And this might be an email to one person. This might be a follow-up email. There is so much lift as a marketer in subject lines, right? And how many times is an email being sent where someone doesn't take a second to think about the subject line and write three of them? When I go create a broadcast email to a 100,000 person list or a million person list or a 2,000 person list,
Hmm.
one of the core things we make people do before they write the email is write 10 subject lines, like marketer land, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So those kinds of little decisions, they're not even presenting themselves with a trade to look at two
Right.
things.
Yeah.
So I think, just to ladder back up to it, why are the 95% not moving forward? It's because they're asking the question, what should I do? Or what should be our quote unquote AI strategy? And they're divorcing it from what should be our strategy to exist and to continue existing and to grow and to be more important. And then
Mm.
where does AI fit there? Data definitely fits everywhere. So I think of it as strategy, data, and then how can AI help us do those better? Um,
Hmm.
and I think the reason they're not making the decision, the reason they're not acting, is the conviction isn't high enough. And
Yeah.
so usually what drives conviction is either pain or overwhelming data driven evidence that you'd almost be stupid not to do it. And the question you have to ask yourself to kind of force some pain early is, how do I get convict enough before everybody else is feeling the pain and doing the thing anyway? How do I
Hmm.
get confident enough? How do I boil this down into trades? So we could
Mm.
probably unpack that even more and make it more actionable. But I think the real answer to your question is conviction, certainty. It's not a data problem. It's not an accuracy problem. It's not a decision problem. It's a getting to a clear trade problem in the decision makers' minds at every level.
Yeah. Like understanding consequences, for example, of not making a decision. Like one of the things that and I've been thinking about a lot more, because I definitely was not a quick decision maker for very, very long, and learned it very late in my career. And I'm still working on getting better at it. One of the ways I've been thinking about it is could just make a decision and then make it work, right? Not for wait to make a decision that you think will work. Make the decision and then make it work. And I think, and this is one of the things that I've learned over the last number of months as we were looking to leverage AI more. It's for me, it's been like a complete revelation of something that I've never really even thought about or thought was possible. Sort of taking this engineering approach to business in general. And I don't have an engineering bone in my body. Well, I didn't think so anyhow. But this whole thing of like test something, see what happens, see what you learn. Like we often talk about, you're either winning or learning.
Yeah.
And the only way you can learn is by actually taking action, right? Again, it has never been one of my strong suits until very recently. But what I've realized now, thanks to AI, I can start doing testing things that I never had even thought about before, didn't have the ability to do before. Now I can test things, and I'm testing dozens of things every day. And through that process, I'm learning more. And I'm sure, millions of other people are having the same experience. I'm
Yeah.
just, of course, trying to get leadership teams there faster. And I'm the sort of the anthropologist in me is also trying to understand like what is holding them back and how can I help them?
Yeah, makes sense. What comes up for me is you can't steer a parked car, right? So I'll be the first one to. A lot of our advertising success was based on the fact that we'd test 1,000 ads versus 10.
Uh-huh.
And we build frameworks to test them in small batches really early, get feedback, and iterate through those loops.
Right. Yeah.
But I think, there's a bigger answer to your question, and this may be self serving on my part. One of the reasons that these leaders are frozen and that anybody is frozen is because the output they're getting is wrong or not quite there. And they're promised a level of magic and they see demonstrated levels of magic, but then their first attempt isn't yielding similar level of magic that's applicable to them. Something we do when we train customers is we say, hey, it's not about a magic prompt. It's actually all about the follow up of going back and forth 3, 4, 5 times.
Uh-huh.
And that's really fast. It's like literally just think out loud with it and you get somewhere much faster. So that's a tiny level. But the
Uh-huh.
other side is part of why we took the thesis we did, which was if we could plumb their real data into AI, they would get to utility much faster
Right.
because there's just all these things you can't ask the LLM that are the most relevant. I mean, what's going to change your business more? The number of leads you're getting and the cost per lead and the quality of those leads, or some external fact that the LLM already knows about? And if the LLM knows about it for everybody, it's not an advantage for you anymore. But you have and are sitting on this gold mine of data. And so I think that's where people get stuck is they just didn't get an output that was sufficiently useful to them.
Uh-huh.
I have like on sticky notes here up above. AI has been here. We just used to call it machine learning, right?
Right.
For a long time. So on my sticky notes, I have AI UX and model output. And I always think about this tug of war between basically everybody started quote unquote using and understanding AI because there was a user experience leap forward in terms of how
Uh-huh.
easy and magical it was to get something back from ChatGPT. So then everybody experienced that output and they're like, wow, this is really cool. It can do this, that, or the other. Some people went crazy with it and prompt engineered. Some people just used it to look up a cooking recipe and it was easier than Google and they were
Uh-huh.
delighted. And then they'll get to this kind of zone of disillusionment where, well, that's cooler than the other thing, but it's not good enough. And so it's just this constant tug of war of the models
Uh-huh.
coming back and forth. There's almost always with new technology a long winter. There's like a hype cycle where people get really excited, they try a bunch of stuff, then it's not as easy. So a bunch of people kind of fall off. There's a dip, there's a trough
Uh-huh.
of it's not as magic as I thought, it's still going to take some work. And then they see that the rest of the market goes, there's potential. This is the new way of doing things. They keep working against it. And then they get an outsized upside payoff.
Uh-huh.
So the stick for those leaders that are frozen and stuck is, hey, other people are going to figure this out. And you don't want to have to get to the pain of people beating you because they went through the trough, the dip after the hype
Uh-huh.
faster than you, or they
Right.
will just beat you. Well, I say this to the plumbers and trades guys and the people that are in not directly disrupted by AI businesses. So we're probably pretty far from Optimus robots being what you own a fleet of that go fix toilets and unclog drains.
Uh-huh.
But what's here now is your competitor out using AI to generate leads, close sales, serve customers, follow up effectively. Your competitor, who is also in a less than easy to disrupt with AI or robotics business, can use AI to disrupt you by outcompeting you.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know. I think I just have to go back to the competitive lens and just say, do you want to get left behind? It's a good stick. And then the
Uh-huh.
fastest way to not get overwhelmed is to pinpoint exactly where do we need to get further? How do we bring our data to the problem and bring AI against that and use it to
Uh-huh.
attack the problem?
Yeah, so let's come back to something you were talking about. You sort of started talking about earlier, which is like a single metric. So, how would you recommend or advise leadership teams identify the single metric that unlocks profitable scaling for them?
So let me just define it first, because
Uh-huh.
that's really important to how the system I use to think about this works. So we think about an X factor decision metric. So this is at the top level, but you could do this for any point
And
A to B
you
that
wrote
somebody's
an entire book
book.
about this,
Yeah, I did.
which we
It's called
which
X
will
factor optimization. Yeah.
in the comments.
I pulled it off market to kind of retool it for AI.
Mm,
We can link to it. But
cool.
the X factor decision metric is some number with a dollar sign next to it
Uh-huh.
that must be changed for us to increase the speed toward our goals. So, and that's the critical factor. I find that when you can put a dollar sign next to the metric, that's what clarifies the thinking up and down the chain across the board. Elon is famous for doing this. He looked at what a rocket cost, he looked at the raw materials, and then he said, hey, we need to make the cost per rocket this number, right?
Uh-huh.
So, like a tenth, maybe the materials cost 2% of the final cost of the rocket. He calls it the idiot index. So,
Uh-huh.
he was saying, hey, we should be able to get it from $1 billion down to 100 million, right? Per
Yeah.
launch.
Right.
In a normal business that's dependent on a CRM, it's probably something like cost per lead, cost per acquisition, dollars per X. Like you start there. Our
Uh,
real secret sauce was the core idea of X factor optimization is there's some number a little bit after cost per lead or cost per acquisition, but before lifetime value. That
uh,
is likely the core key clear driver of that business. So in businesses with subscriptions, one example I use is it's the cost per new subscriber,
uh,
backing out all the cost of acquisition and all the initial revenue in the first 30 days. How far ahead or behind are we? Which then, because that's early enough to measure frequently, but deep enough into the customer journey for them to do something about regularly to move the needle. So
uh,
first thing, X factor decision metric, it's a number with a dollar sign next to it. It's usually a cost per or revenue per.
uh,
Then what you act on every day is a needle move metric. So what percentage sign has the most outsized impact on that number? So if you use the simple example of cost per acquisition, then your needle move metric might be conversion rate. So it's just about giving people what's your dollar sign, what's your percent sign, and what's your number sign. So use the number sign to elevate your thinking. We're getting 300 leads right now. How would we go to 3,000? Well, we can't go to 3,000 because what dollar sign is holding us back? Cost per
uh,
lead is it really too high? That's the crazy thing. Very
yeah.
often, if you ask enough of these questions, you'll find that they're just not measuring. Like, that's the best thing I can find for somebody. Hey, did you know that actually these numbers work and you could just turn up the ad budget? You could just add 5 more people to the outbound team and go harder. They just
Uh-huh.
think that the $500 per lead or the whatever per opportunity doesn't work. And if that's really the case, then it's just a matter of breaking it down deeper from there. But the
Yeah.
magic of all this is, hey, plug the data into AI and ask these questions. Ask it, where am I constrained? And you can't go ask a normal model that because it doesn't have your business data.
Does yeah. Yeah. Which is what Cerebro Plum does. Um,
Or
I
I
mean,
would
we.
even say, like, if people just want to experiment with it to get more conviction, right? You can export some data from anything and
Uh-huh.
feed it to the LLMs. I mean, yes, I have a bent on how to solve this easier, faster for people, but to get some initial conviction and some traction, pull any data set out of any tool you use and
Uh-huh.
analyze it and
Right.
ask it, hey, my goal is this. Help me figure out in dollar signs, give me a cost per or revenue per to measure our efficiency here
Mm-hmm.
and tell me what I should focus on.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, and it makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it would be helpful to a lot of people because, I mean, we're having these conversations every single day with many different types of businesses, and they all have some of the sort of the obvious differences are they need, you know, 10,000 customers who pay them $10,000, or they need 50 customers that pay them $1 million. So that sort of on the more sort of B2B sort of extreme ends, but I've had both of those cases just in the last week.
Mm.
And how they approach it is very different. So the company that is doing the $1 million deals, they have currently have 6 salespeople. For them, without looking at the data, the obvious thing is we need to add 3 or 4 more salespeople, right?
Mm-hmm.
In looking at their data, we realized that they could actually increase their revenue goal, which is a 30% increase next year, without adding any salespeople. But they have to invest that somewhere else, and it's going to be in this particular case. And they still have to make the decision. We just provide the data and say you could actually do this without hiring any additional salespeople, or instead of hiring 4 new salespeople, you just hire 1 new salesperson, and then you invest a fraction of that in marketing and efficiency and data and tools, because everything will just drops to the bottom line, to your point of profitability versus revenue. So they were chasing revenue. But once we present to them the fact that, well, would you rather have X revenue and Y profit, or would you have a lower revenue and a higher profit? Anyways, I think your point is like every business leadership team has to decide that for themselves because their business is not the same as everybody else's.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
they have to
there's
use their own
also a
data.
fair question of why not just do both of those in that case? Like, why not add the 6 salespeople and make the process more efficient? I mean, that's the way the people that are going to beat you are going to beat you. They're going to do more volume and they're going to use that back to the engineering thing. They're going to do more volume and they're going to get it right with repetition.
Correct.
So you could ask yourself, it's always like, why can't we? Why not? But I think the up level of the conversation is also, how is this going to change? So you and I have done a little bit of this where there's things you might have only done deeper into a customer engagement for money that now with AI can move to the front.
Yes.
That is a lot of what I'm thinking about for many businesses right now is what step in the process that's 5, 10 steps deep could actually be the beginning of the journey for the customer, which is complete game changing as to how they interact with you and why.
Yeah.
And we've seen this kind of disruption pattern happen to lots of industries. It's usually around price and data information to the end buyer. Like Lending Tree used to be that you would go, you remember the old commercials when banks compete you in, right? You used to go fill out an application in a bunch of places and they grew purely because they built, let's underwrite before we apply. Let's go collect the information and then feed it to a whole bunch of different banks. And that's a simple example that seems trite and old to us, but almost everybody here has something that is laborious they might be able to do with AI that is actually a lead magnet, a start to their customer journey that completely changes the game. I often, when I try to take it out of this simple or this like overly, when I try to sound smart, we talk about some of the stuff we've been talking about. When we get down to brass tacks and we need to figure it out, I think about 3 buckets: cost to market, cost to sell, cost to fulfill. And when you look at it that way, if you say, hey, is there something in that fulfillment bucket that we can do as our marketing on the front end? It changes the numbers on all of them. It completely wipes the board and you stop thinking about this is better than that in terms of percentage improvements. You think about it's a reinvention, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the
that's
bigger thing we're facing is reinvention, lack of reinvention risk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've even learned that ourselves. It's like because we're testing different things, we're realizing that the changes and the possibilities are not only cross-functional, because again, it's just our mindsets just have to change completely as business leaders, right? Because we used to think of cross-functional as the sort of horizontal thing, like marketing, sales, service, ops, finance, whatever your structure in your company is, but it's cross-functional meant horizontal, right? So what we've been working on for the last 7 or 8 years is how do we bring cross-functional customer teams into one system, tracking data that's aligned and whatever, which was a huge advancement for a lot of companies, which we call, revenue operations. And instead of, sales ops and marketing ops and service ops, we have one revenue operations team that's aligning them all. Now, with the possibilities with AI, we're realizing, to your point, is like we can uncover so much value already in the marketing, sales, and service process that makes things completely different, and easier and better for the delivery side of the business. So on the services we deliver, because we already have so much data before we even start doing the work, which is more efficient for everybody, and eventually will bring prices down and value up for everybody. So anyway, it is super exciting. But Andrew, so as we wrap up here, so is there maybe either one sort of framework or piece of advice that you can leave our audience with as we, start wrapping up 2025 and get ready for what looks to be a very exciting 2026?
Yeah. I think the frame I've put into my head is find your profit prompt. So to take this back to AI, you're looking for something you can ask AI on a regular basis that yields a profit for you. So the way we think about it is if the AI has your data, however you get it into the AI and whichever model or models you choose, you need recurring data and a recurring action you can take as a result of that data that makes you money, makes you more or less. Examples would be they're usually either on the buy side or the sell side. So making a decision to buy more of this or buy at this price or not, or who to follow up with, or which ad to spend more on, which leads to follow up with and when. They're all kind
Mm-hmm.
of in that vein. And
Mm,
I just give people this simple 2x2 matrix. Maybe this is the simplest way to leave this. To increase profit, we'll all agree that you kind of have to either increase revenue or decrease cost. So
mm,
that's one half of my 2x2. So think in terms of increase revenue or decrease cost. And then I just break it down into new and existing. So the simplest way to leave somebody here is okay, where am I going to go be more profitable by either increasing revenue on the new side or increasing revenue on the existing, or
mm-hmm.
decreasing cost on the new side or decreasing cost on the existing? Just 2x2, up revenue, down cost, new, existing. And that's kind of how I tell people to think, like pick a quadrant and load some data and ask some questions. And you should
Mm-hmm.
be able to find a prompt that you can run on a regular basis, or we like to help people do this to figure that out. And if
Mm,
people want to just take the easy path, we will happily load all their data and give them several example prompts like this that can help them find the clue and see if there's something there for
mm-hmm.
them to find. Because every time we do an AI enabled audit, especially just CRMs, we almost always find orders of magnitude of anything more than this could cost
Mm,
in leads that have stalled, haven't been followed up with, were forgotten about, or just some small revenue opportunity, especially with the size of customers you're talking about that might have 6 salespeople going after $50 million deals.
mm-hmm.
Just doesn't take that many more of those that we can go mop up and figure out huge wins. So
Yeah.
find your
Yeah.
profit prompt, look under new and existing, and look for increases in revenue and decrease in cost, and pick a quadrant and start throwing darts, and you'll probably make more money in less time than you thought you would and get further ahead faster.
Awesome. That's great advice, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining me today. It
Thank
was
you.
I always learn so much because of your sort of analytical way of thinking, and again, your strong conviction of knowing what works and what knowing what works. And one of the other things I learned from you is you're not really concerned about what doesn't work because you just focus on trying things that you think will work, and you just keep learning from them, and eventually they do work. And I believe a lot of our audience can learn from that. And I'm one of them. So thanks again.
Thank you. Success comes from our winners.
That's right. That's right. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thanks.